We'll start with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa. Let me do it in the chanting style. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. And today is May 10th, 2014. Okay, good morning, everybody. Yeah, I'll stand up so everybody can... No, I'm standing so everybody can see me. I'm not asking you to stand up. The advantage of this room rather than Kuan Yin Hall, first it gives a more compact and cozy feeling, and I think the acoustics might be better here.
It is.
Yeah. The disadvantage is that without the raised platform, people in the back see only the heads of the people in the front. But if I stand up, everybody could see this very youthful and handsome. Youthful, handsome, charming. Okay. Today we will do Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 114. This is called Sevitabbāsevitabba Sutta. And this starts in the middle-length Discourses. It starts on page 913. This is one of the longer discourses within the middle-length Discourses. But even though it's quite long, the structure is fairly simple. It uses a kind of basic template, and then it applies this template to a whole variety of items. And then, if it were to be fully expanded, it would be even longer, because if you've read the sutta already, you see that the main part of the sutta, or each major section, is spoken by Venerable Sariputta, but then the Buddha confirms the explanation of Venerable Sariputta by repeating the entire explanation. And in the printed editions of the Majjhima Nikaya, the Buddha's repetition is, of course, abridged, because it's no point to repeat word for word everything that was said. But if we were to fully include the Buddha's repetition, then the sutta would come out almost double its present size. Okay, the key word in the whole sutta, or the two words in the title, Sevitabbā and Asevitabbā. The word Sevitabbā comes from the root save, and then from this we get a verb save, savity, and a noun, savana, which I wouldn't be surprised if this word is connected etymologically with the English words serve and service. In fact, there's an organization, a US-based organization called the Seva Foundation. I think it was established by Ram Dass, or at least he played a prominent role in it. And its function is to provide service to poor communities around the world. And then the word Sevitabbā is what grammatical form? We have some of our Pali students here. Kam, you know what it is.
Future passive.
Right. Future passive participle. Sevitabbā. So Sevitabbā, it has a range of meanings. That which is to be served, that which is to be followed in regard to practices, that or those who are to be associated with in regard to persons, that which is to be cultivated. So here we use kind of broad rendering for the title, to be cultivated, and then the opposite of Sevitabbā is Asevitabbā, what is not to be cultivated. And so the sutta, as you will see, is sort of strung out upon this opposition between things that one should pursue, that one should associate with, that one should follow, that one should cultivate, and then the opposite, those things which should be avoided, which should be rejected, which should be discarded, or in short, those things which should not be cultivated. Okay, so the sutta begins with the Buddha sort of setting up, I think in later Pali language we would call this a Matika, which is like an outline, which is like a list of items. A list of items or an outline, or even you could call it a table of contents, which is to be expanded, to be elaborated. And the word Matika, it's related to the word, it's actually derived from the word Mata, which means a mother. And the function of a mother, what makes a woman a mother is she gives birth to children. And so a Matika is like an outline, a table of contents, which sets up a number of topics. And then you could say that the outline is pregnant with a number of topics. And then by expanding that outline, you get a full discourse. So the Matika gives birth to the discourse. Okay, so the Buddha begins the sutta by saying that he addresses the monks. He says, I will teach you a discourse on what should be cultivated and what should not be cultivated. And then he lays out the outline, the Matika, or he sets up the Matika, and he says, monks, bodily conduct is of two kinds, I say, to be cultivated and not to be cultivated. And bodily conduct, here it's translated, and bodily conduct is either the one or the other. But I looked at the Pali this morning, I'm not so much in agreement with that rendering now. I would say that, now I would render this, and these are different from one another. Okay, then verbal conduct is of two kinds, to be cultivated and not to be cultivated. And these two kinds are different from one another. Then the same is said about mental conduct, inclination of mind, and something called acquisition of perception, then acquisition of view, then acquisition of individuality or personal existence is of two kinds, I say, to be cultivated and not to be cultivated. And these kinds of acquisition of individuality are different from one another. Okay, so this is the Buddha's, the Matika, the outline, table of contents, scheme of topics that the Buddha has set up. And it's very concise because the Buddha has introduced all of these terms, but he hasn't explained them. Perhaps it was his intention to elaborate upon them himself, but after the Buddha finished announcing these topics, let me move this down. Then the venerable Sariputta gets up and he says that I understand the detailed meaning of the Buddha's utterance, which he spoke in brief without explaining the detailed meaning. And now the Venerable Sariputta is going to elaborate on the meaning of the Buddha's statement. So first he just repeats the statement, and then he says, with reference to what was this said, what is the detailed meaning of that brief statement? And now here we see not only the key to this discourse, but in a way, Sariputta is going to enunciate the key to the Buddha's teaching as a whole, at least to the practical aspect of the Buddha's teaching. He says, Venerable Sir, such bodily conduct as causes unwholesome states to increase and wholesome states to diminish in one who cultivates it should not be cultivated. But such bodily conduct as causes unwholesome states to diminish and wholesome states to increase in one who cultivates it should be cultivated. So here we see this, right at the outset, this major dichotomy or distinction is made between what is called, in the translation, it's called unwholesome states and wholesome states. And the Pali terms here are so the contrast is between, in Pali, akusala dhamma, which is what we translate as unwholesome states, unwholesome qualities. Some translators use unskillful qualities. Some use simply bad qualities. And on the other side, we have kusala dhamma. These are what translate wholesome states. Some translate wholesome states. Did I say for akusala? Did I say some use skillful? Oh, I'm sorry. For akusala, some use unskillful or bad states. And for the kusala dhamma, we could use wholesome states, wholesome qualities, skillful qualities, or simply good qualities. And it's the unwholesome qualities which are Sevitabbāsevitabba, not to be cultivated, not to be pursued, which are to be rejected, abandoned, eliminated. And it's the wholesome qualities, the good qualities, which are Sevitabbā, to be cultivated, to be developed, to be pursued, to be brought to fulfillment. And what is meant here by these dhammas, states or qualities, are qualities of the mind, mental qualities. So the qualities of the mind are, in a sense, we could say that they manifest in various channels, not only in the mind themselves, but unwholesome qualities manifest in bodily action, in speech, and the wholesome qualities also will manifest in bodily actions and in speech. And there's a kind of cycle involved in the interplay between, we could call it interplay between mental states and behavior, such that behavior flows from certain psychological states, mental states. And then when one engages in the outer behavior, whether bodily or verbal behavior, that feeds back into the mind and reinforces the mental states, either good or bad. For example, when you get angry, then that anger doesn't tend to remain inside, but it will manifest in some way. Like you speak angrily to somebody, harshly and bitterly. Or if the anger becomes even stronger, you might even lash out and punch somebody. Or if you restrain yourself from hitting somebody, you might bang a table or break a plate against the table. So this is a manifestation of anger inside, but when you release that anger in that way, then it tends to reinforce the tendency to anger, so that on a later occasion you get angry more easily, and then that anger can explode in even stronger harsh speech or violent behavior. And similarly, when one restrains oneself from angry outbursts or from violent behavior, when one gets angry, and instead one tries to arouse a state of patience, you do some reflection that will strengthen patience. Or if you're angry with another person, you arouse a feeling of loving kindness or compassion towards that person, then that can manifest in wholesome behavior. So if you, instead of getting angry, you develop patience, then you might speak softly and gently to that person. You know, if you're upset with a person for some kind of rough behavior on the part of that person, instead of speaking harshly to that person, you could say, you know, would you have a few minutes? It doesn't mean that you have to always be sweet and polite to the person, but you could say, do you have a few minutes? I just want to talk to you about the way you've been behaving recently. then you say, please don't take it personally, we all have our faults, but I just wanted to point out something that you've been doing recently, not only to myself but others, and it's good to correct yourself. It will create much more harmony within our group. And so in this way you speak politely and in a friendly way to that person, and then it has benefits for that person. They'll change their way, hopefully. And at any rate, you've protected your own mind from yielding to anger. And if you're successful in speaking to that person, then it creates the feeling of, sometimes a feeling of harmony with that person and a feeling of, congeniality. So if that person is, of a good disposition, he'll say, "Thank you, I didn't realize I was acting in that way. I'll try to correct myself in the future." And so that way, everybody gains. It's a win-win situation. Whereas if you just get angry, then you lose because you defile your own mind with anger. The other person loses because he gets upset. And then sometimes that anger can spread from you, the other person, even more widely. When the other person gets home, he has a dog or a cat, he'll kick the cat, kick the dog, then the dog gets angry, but the dog can't bite its master, so the dog goes out on the street and bites a stranger. And the stranger sues the person who owns the dog, so it goes all the ways down the line. Okay, so we have here sort of the key to the whole sutta is you could treat bodily conduct just as a kind of X, a blank that one could fill in with any term. So such bodily conduct as causes unwholesome states to increase and wholesome states to diminish should not be cultivated, but such bodily conduct that causes unwholesome states to diminish and wholesome states to increase in one who cultivates it should be cultivated. Okay, so that is sort of setting up one type of sort of brief explanation, and now Sariputta is going to elaborate it by explaining what kind of bodily conduct causes unwholesome states to increase and wholesome states to diminish. And here he elaborates in terms of the three most fundamental types of wrong conduct or unwholesome conduct. That is, killing living beings, taking life, stealing the property or belongings of others, and then engaging in misconduct in regard to sensual pleasures, which is explained as having intercourse. Again, we have to understand that early Buddhism is coming from basically out of a patriarchal society, so it's always explained from the standpoint, or at least some of these ethical principles, from the standpoint of the male. So it's one who has intercourse with such women as are protected by mother, father, both parents, and so on. So such bodily conduct should not be engaged in. You could just, in modern society, we would explain it from both perspectives, from the perspective of both the man and the woman. Okay, so that is the bodily conduct that causes unwholesome states to increase and wholesome states to diminish. And then the opposite of this is the bodily conduct that causes unwholesome states to diminish to be reduced, to decline, to be eliminated, and that causes the wholesome states, the good, skillful qualities of mind to increase. And then this is explained in terms of the three most fundamental types of right action. So this is abstaining from the killing of living beings. That's explained negatively, but more positively, it's with the rod and weapon laid aside, one is gentle and kindly and abides compassionate to all living beings. And the second is abandoning stealing, misappropriation of the belongings of others, and dwelling honestly. Then abandoning misconduct and sensual pleasures, and not having relations with any of those women who are considered to be out of bounds. Okay, so then Sariputta sums up at the end of section 5. He says it was with reference to this that it was said by the Buddha that bodily conduct is of two kinds, to be cultivated and not to be cultivated, and these two are different from one another. Let's go through a few of these, then I'll open up for questions. Okay, so the next section, again it uses the same template, but it just replaces bodily conduct with verbal conduct, that is, types of speech. So again, speech or verbal conduct is of two kinds. The type that causes unwholesome states to increase and wholesome states to diminish, that is, here we have 4 types of wrong speech. That is, speaking falsehood, especially the case which is singled out for emphasis here is bearing false witness against another in court, or at a meeting, or in the community. Then comes what is called malicious speech, which might be rendered, maybe more accurately rendered as divisive speech. This is a kind of speech which is intended to create divisions and conflict between people, either individuals or groups of people, who are on harmonious terms with one another. So when one speaks pisuna vacha, then one says to this person, you know, that one said such and such about you. And then in this way, this person, the one on my left, comes to feel hostile towards that person, the one on my right. And one might speak to the person on the right and say, you know, that fellow on the left said such and such about you. And that way one is creating hostility on both sides. Okay, then the third type of harsh speech, the third type of wrong speech is harsh speech, angry speech, speech which creates pain in the hearts of others. And then the fourth is gossip or idle chatter. And then that's elaborated as speaking at the wrong time, speaking what is contrary to fact, speaking what is useless, speaking contrary to the Dharma and the discipline. Words that are worthless, unreasonable, immoderate, and unbeneficial. Okay, then the opposite of this, these are the types of wholesome verbal conduct or right speech. Again, we have 4 contrasting types. The first is abandoning false speech and speaking the truth. The second is abandoning divisive speech and speaking words which promote concord and enjoying concord, rejoicing in concord, delighting in concord, speaking words that promote concord. The third is abandoning harsh speech and speaking words that are gentle, pleasing to the ear, lovable, words that go to the heart, which are courteous and agreeable to hear. Then abandoning gossip, speaking at the right time, speaking what is fact, speaking on what is good, speaking in accordance with the Dharma and the discipline, and so forth. Okay, so these are the 4 types of right verbal conduct or right speech. And then we have mental conduct, again to be cultivated and not to be cultivated. And the kind of mental conduct which is not to be cultivated, usually we have in other suttas which are more concise, we have 3 types of wrong mental conduct and 3 types of right mental conduct. But here, in this sutta, a finer distinction is made by moving the 3rd type of mental conduct concerns one's views. And in this sutta, that is moved into a category of its own. And so we have just 2 types of wrong mental conduct and 2 types of right mental conduct. So the type of wrong mental conduct, here I'm at the top of page 917, the type that causes unwholesome states to increase and wholesome states to diminish. As explained here, someone is covetous. He covets the wealth and property of others thus. That is, he thinks, may what belongs to another be mine. And then the contrary of this is the mind of ill will. This is expressive of hatred. So this is the mind of ill will that takes the form, may these beings be slain and slaughtered, may they be cut off, may they perish, may they be annihilated. So that is the mental conduct that causes unwholesome states to increase and wholesome states to diminish. And then the opposite of that, it's explained here negatively as simply, these are the mental states that cause, or the mental conduct that causes unwholesome states to diminish and wholesome states to increase. And it's explained negatively as someone is not covetous, he does not covet the wealth and property of others, and then he is without ill will, and he has no intentions of hate, or he has intentions free from hate. Now, to understand these properly, what makes these especially designated as unwholesome and wholesome mental conduct is that here, what's called covetousness, in Pali, abhijja, and ill will, is vyapada. These mental qualities or mental states become unwholesome karma or an unwholesome course of karma when they manifest in the form covetousness, when it manifests as thinking, desiring to take possession of the property or belongings of others. So it actually manifests in the form of thoughts, even scheming and planning to misappropriate the belongings of others. And ill will becomes a strong, decisive case of mental wrong conduct when it takes the form of thoughts of wishing others to be injured, to undergo misfortune, or in the most severe case, to die. But as we'll see, these two mental states, covetousness and ill will, can take lighter forms, weaker forms, in which they are not designated as mental misconduct, but instead they're called inclinations of mind. That's what we come to in paragraph or section 8. So here Sariputta says, inclination of mind is of two kinds, I say, to be cultivated and not to be cultivated. An inclination of mind, and each inclination of mind is different from the others. Okay, so what is the kind not to be cultivated? Such inclination of mind as causes unwholesome states to increase and wholesome states to diminish should not be cultivated, and such inclination of mind as causes unwholesome states to diminish and wholesome states to increase, that should be cultivated. I think the expression for inclination of mind here is chit upada. Which means literally an arising of the mind. So it can be understood as a kind of disposition, an inclination, a way of thinking which doesn't yet manifest in the form of these strong, definitive thoughts. But it's just that these states of mind are sort of, you know, when you're boiling water to make tea in a pot, first you see little bubbles coming up. If you stand by the stove watching the water in the pot, you see these little bubbles coming up. And then if it continues, if you keep the heat on, then those little bubbles start to increase in size till the big bubbles come up and start breaking at the surface of the water. Okay, we could say that the chitupada, the inclination of mind, those are like the little bubbles coming up in the water. Then when the little bubbles increase in size and become big bubbles that come to the surface of the water and break, that's where the inclination of mind has turned into mental conduct, either good or bad. Okay, so now Sariputta in paragraph 8, section 8, he raises the question, what kind of inclination of mind causes unwholesome states to increase and wholesome states to diminish in one who cultivates it? Then we have the explanation. Here, someone is covetous and he abides with his mind imbued with or permeated with covetousness, and he has ill will, and he abides with his mind imbued with ill will, and he is cruel, and he abides with his mind imbued with cruelty. Such inclination of mind causes unwholesome states to increase and wholesome states to diminish. So, if we consider this, you could see that at least of the three factors mentioned here, two of them are the same as the two that we find under unwholesome mental conduct. That is, we have covetousness and ill will. But it seems, I think this is the way the commentary explains it, the way I would interpret it, that under inclination of mind, the covetousness and the ill will are still weaker, are at a rather weak phase, that they are sort of saturating the thought process, causing these thoughts to arise, but they haven't yet swollen to the point where one actually is thinking how to get the possessions of others, scheming and planning, or forming these strong yearning. Oh, that Venerable Subodha's hand phone might be mine. Or that Sandy's, is that Hello Kitty? Is that a pocketbook? Hello Kitty pocketbook might be mine. But just when I see Venerable Subodha's hand phone and I think, oh, I would like to have a hand phone like that. Of course I have one, but I hardly use it. They call it a smartphone. I always say it's smart, so smart that it's smarter than I am. When I'm thinking thoughts like that, without actually wishing to get possession, then it's an inclination of mind. And similarly, when I'm getting angry with somebody and having hurt feelings towards them or angry feelings towards them, that's the inclination of mind governed by ill will. But it's when that ill will takes the form of really wishing them to undergo some kind of injury or suffering or loss, even loss of life, then it becomes the full-fledged mental misconduct. In the case of here, it's translated cruelty, or this is more literally, it's harmfulness or injury. Seems hard to figure how you could have a mind of injury towards somebody without wishing them to actually undergo injury. Is that possible? Anyway, something to think about. Okay, then we have the opposite, would be the inclination of mind that causes unwholesome states to diminish and wholesome states to increase. And then here we have somebody is uncovetous and dwells with his mind detached from covetousness, and he is without ill will and abides with his mind detached from ill will, and he is without cruelty, and he abides with his mind detached from cruelty. Such inclination of mind causes unwholesome states to diminish and wholesome states to increase in one who cultivates it. Okay, so that is the twofold distinction. And now we have the next paragraph. Even a subtler distinction is made, again using this same pattern. Here it's spoken of in regard to the acquisition of perception. Okay, so the contrast is made between these two types of perception. And then jumping down to the third paragraph in this section, what kind of acquisition of perception causes unwholesome states to increase and wholesome states to diminish? Then we have someone is covetous and abides with his perception imbued with covetousness. He has ill will and abides with his perception imbued with ill will. He is cruel and abides with his perception imbued with cruelty. And then the opposite is simply someone is uncovetous, perception is detached from covetousness, same for ill will, same for cruelty. Okay, maybe at this point we'll take a little pause and we'll see if anybody has any questions. Or maybe I could ask the question of how do we distinguish an inclination of mind imbued with covetousness and perception imbued with covetousness? How do we distinguish inclination of mind imbued with ill will and perception imbued with ill will? And when I ask this question, don't think, Bhante knows the right answer and he's testing us. I don't have a clear and easy answer in my mind. So just come up with what you think, and we'll see what we can make of it. Stephen?
Bhante, I was wondering, when one does an action that seems sort of self-centered, like perhaps somebody was driving on the highway in a very fast and aggressive way,
Yeah.
but really what they're thinking about is, I want to get home quick.
Yeah.
At the same time, of course, they're having disregard for their surrounding commuters' safety.
Exactly, yeah.
So they don't seem to be expressing ill will towards the other drivers, but at the same time, they are creating a very dangerous situation.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So maybe that has something to do with how you can not be actively expressing ill will, but still creating some sort of ill will.
Creating ill will in others.
Or towards others, because you not care if they live or die in a way.
Yeah. I mean, what I would say, firstly, is that the kind of schematism which is developed here is choosing, maybe we could say, the principal manifestations of unwholesome mental conduct. But it doesn't mean that these would be all-inclusive, that every type of mental misconduct can be fit into this scheme. What I would say is that somebody who's driving very fast on a highway and setting up a dangerous situation, it's rather hard to put his mental state in the pigeonholes of either covetousness or ill will, but it's disregard for the safety of others, and disregard for his own safety as well. And so it's an unwholesome mental state. One has to have respect for, one's own safety, the safety of others, and respect for the rules of the road.
So the way I kind of felt was perception of ill will. It seems to me more preliminary than what's the other one?
Inclination of mind. Yeah.
So perception it's like actually that's where kind of it all starts. see something, a person, for example, just
Yeah.
we get the wrong, we start with the wrong perception,
Yeah, yeah,
such that then we react to that person in a negative way.
yeah, yeah,
So that's how I see the perception side. Inclination is more like the irritability of the mind
It's-
because of that perception.
I say irritability, yeah.
It still hasn't really broken out, but
Yeah.
there is now tendency for it to really mushroom into thoughts,
Yeah,
creating
yeah, yeah.
the third level of what we had, the true ill will.
Okay, so in other words, you're positing like 3 stages in the manifestation of either covetousness or ill will. So first there's the perceptual stage, then it starts, the perception can take place even below, we could say below the threshold of thought. It's just something that maybe you could say occurs almost unconsciously or with a bare consciousness. Then as those perceptions sort of solidify, then they give rise to the inclination of mind, which is the form of elementary thoughts, what I call the small bubbles. And then the thoughts or the inclinations then will manifest in the stronger types of unwholesome mental conduct. Yeah, that seems to be a good point. And what you said sort of, I think of a concrete situation, which maybe, unless there are any real saints in the room, probably all of us have experienced. Sometimes, you're in a group and somebody comes into the room and you've never met that person before. You've had no relation with that person, but just something comes off, it just a little irritation in the field of perception. Maybe it's just the way the person gestures, or the way the person maybe steps or walks, or the way the person drops into his seat, or if people are distributing like some snacks, the way he chews on the snack, something just, rubs you the wrong way. But it's just occurring first in the perceptual field. And then you start, those perceptions then start to make a stronger impact on the mind. So then some kind of thoughts of annoyance, irritation, dislike arise towards this person. And then maybe it will happen that the person does something that really, pisses you off. And then you get really angry at that person and I wish he'd get out of here. Has anybody had those kind of experience before? Maybe I'm just a little bit weak in my nature. And then there are things, you see that you like. Somebody comes driving up in a new car, and then you like that kind of car, and then over time you start wishing, I wish I had a car like that. Then, with a car you don't expect another person to give it to you off the bat, but with things less valuable, I wish he'd give that to me. Yes, please. I think, do we have this is the one I think that should be passed around. Watch the wire.
Testing. Hi, Wendy. Sometimes it's no reason at all, it's just the mental habitual tendency wishing ill wills to others.
Tendency what?
Habitual tendency to act on ill will towards others.
Yeah.
It's not even getting to the point of perceptions and clinging to it, and it just it's like a spontaneous habitual tendency towards hatred.
Yeah, though I would say that if it's a habitual tendency, then something
that causes
Oh, I see. Well, there would have been, I say, past causes that sort of
It's more like
established that tendency.
it's not even a mental state. It's more like spontaneous, instantly,
yeah, or
yeah. It's that feeling that triggers it.
Yeah, well, I say that like we all have these dispositions or tendencies which have been, established in the mind through repeated habitual behavior. But I'd say that those tendencies became tendencies probably through a process that would have started through some kind of perception, setting off some kind of thoughts. And then when we allow those thoughts to go without checking them,
Right.
and becoming aware of them and then trying to counteract them, then they become tendencies, dispositions, which will spring up more prominently on later occasions.
But a lot of people are not aware of those states.
Yeah, that's why one has
Awareness.
to be. Yeah, that's why we have to be aware of our own mind. Okay, let me just. Okay, this question is, isn't acquisition of perception how we subconsciously pick and choose what we regard as pleasant or unpleasant, desirable and undesirable, and then covetousness and ill will follow? Yeah, this is a good point also, that I say at the stage of perception, sort of what one initially perceives are things as being pleasant, unpleasant. What was the other pair that he used? Desirable and undesirable? Yeah, so those things make the impression on the mind as being either pleasant and desirable, in which case it will give rise to thoughts of covetousness, greed, or desire, or else things will be picked up by perception as being unpleasant, disagreeable, in which case it will tend to trigger off thoughts of ill will, and then eventually those strong, powerful thoughts of ill will. Any other ideas? Okay, Asman and Suki.
I have a question concerning the way it's phrased by the acquisition of perception.
Yeah.
Usually acquisition implies habituated or as a result of karma. Is that?
Not necessarily a result of karma. It's actually, I have to say, even for me, it's a bit of a strange expression. Yes. Acquisition of perception.
Right.
I just don't know how to explain it. Normally, we would just speak about perception. Yeah, it seems, when we translated acquisition of perception, it sounds a bit peculiar. But maybe, back in India in the Buddha's time, it was a kind of idiom that would have made sense. And maybe it shouldn't have been taken too literally, in the sense that you acquire a perception the way you might acquire a new house, a piece of property, or a new computer, whatever. Okay, Suki?
So here you have a mental conduct and then inclination of mind and the acquisition of perception,
right.
3 different kinds. And I don't have much problem with the way everybody explained about perception, but I have a little bit of a question between mental conduct and inclination of mind. When you described it's the degree of little bubble, big bubble and little bubble. It seems to me mental conduct is actually, it's an action, which is a bubble making an act, but the mind, the inclination of mind, It's before the action, it's a state of mind. That's the way I kind of thought. So once, when you make a little bubble, whether it's little or big, it is an action which will lead to karma.
Yeah.
So that's, I don't know, I like to kind of see the difference.
I would say that also what's called the inclination of mind, maybe it's not such a satisfactory rendering in that sense. Maybe you call it a state of mind, or an act of mind, or an occasion of mind. It's also, I would say, definitely creating karma, but the karma that's created is not as strong as that which would be created by the type of covetousness and ill will which are classified as mental conduct. Those would be, I would still say that the inclination of mind is taking the form of thoughts. A thought of a thought sort of governed by covetousness or by ill will or by their opposites. But it's not as prominent as those which are classified as mental misconduct or mental good conduct. That's my understanding. Okay, then I think we should move on because I want to finish this whole sutta today. Okay, so now we come to section 10. This is called acquisition of view. So now we're actually speaking about the contrast between two kinds of views. And normally within the scheme of the 10 types of wholesome, unwholesome action and 10 types of wholesome action, wrong view and right view, as explained here, are included in mental good conduct or mental bad conduct. But here, the view is made a category in its own right. Okay, so the view is of two kinds, to be cultivated and not to be cultivated. So the kind of view which is not to be cultivated is the kind that causes unwholesome states to increase and wholesome states to diminish. And what kind of view is that? Okay, so that is explained here. Someone holds such a view as this: there is nothing given, nothing offered, nothing sacrificed. Here, should not be taken too literally. They're not saying that nobody ever gives anything to anybody else. But what it actually means is that there's no point in giving, no point in making offerings to others, no point in practicing charity. No fruit or result of good and bad actions, no this world, no other world. This seems a little bit puzzling, but what it means is, of course, the person who's in his right mind can't deny the existence of this world, but what they mean is that there's no such thing as taking rebirth from this world into another world, and no such thing as beings from other worlds taking rebirth into this world. So no mother, no father. Again, this shouldn't be taken literally. The person is not saying that people are not born from mother or father, but it means that there's no point, no obligation to look after one's mother and father. No beings who are reborn spontaneously. No good and virtuous ascetics and Brahmins in the world who have realized for themselves by direct knowledge the nature of this world and the other world, and then declare them to others. So it's said that this kind of view causes unwholesome states to increase and wholesome states to diminish, then the opposite of this is the view that causes unwholesome states to diminish and wholesome states to increase. So this is the affirmation. There is what is given, what is offered, what is sacrificed. In other words, that there is some kind of moral value in practicing giving, generosity, charity. There is fruit and result in good and bad actions. There is this world as a sphere of rebirth for those in other realms. There is the other world as a sphere of rebirth for people in this world. There is some obligation to look after one's mother and father. There are beings who are reborn spontaneously. There are good and virtuous ascetics and Brahmins in this world who have realized for themselves by direct knowledge the nature of this world and the world beyond and explain them to others. So this view causes unwholesome states to diminish and wholesome states to increase in one who cultivates it. Okay, could be a little bit problematic because now we have many people today who will be complete skeptics with regard to any existence after death, complete skeptics about any other realms besides the human realm. They'll hold that this is the only life that we live. When you're born, you come into existence out of nothing. When you die, when the body perishes, everything vanishes. No survival, personal survival in any form. And yet, people who hold views like this can be perfectly upright, morally, be committed to the highest ethical standards, or at least very high ethical standards. While many people who at least nominally subscribe to karma and rebirth can be very unethical in their behavior. Oh, okay. Yeah, quite thirsty this morning. Okay, so I think one has to see this statement, or at least my interpretation, see it against the background of the Buddha's period, where it was taken for granted that any sort of normal person, a reasonable person, would accept some kind of survival beyond death. And those who went about denying existence beyond death would be those who said, don't practice giving, don't practice generosity. Whatever you get belongs to you. It's the fruits of your own hard-earned labor. Keep it, enjoy it. This is the only life you have. Enjoy it while you can. Get as much out of it as you can. And the heck with the others. And even some of the thinkers would hold very extreme positions. Like they would say that, it doesn't matter if you go around killing, slaying, stealing in order to advance your own well-being. Do it. Don't waste your time practicing giving, helping others, being of service to others. And to hold, I think in the Buddha's time, to hold this view that there's nothing beyond death, that would be the way if you were in the American Midwest or in the Deep South and it got known that he's an atheist. He must be killing little babies and eating them at night. The atheist. But also I would say that, looking at it from the standpoint of long-term spiritual cultivation, that I would say that, the view that there is karma, that there is existence beyond this life, would be a view that will be more conducive to long-range spiritual cultivation. Because somebody who doesn't believe in any existence beyond the present life might still hold to, standards of ethical behavior out of his own sort of moral sense of moral conscience, might be a very good, worthy, upright person, but there would be not that motivation for practicing what I call the higher cultivation, the cultivation leading to enlightenment, to liberation. Any comments on this?
I wonder what is that higher?
The higher cultivation?
Yeah.
It would be the practice of the full Noble Eightfold Path, the 7 factors of enlightenment, the development of all of the higher qualities of mind. Though actually one could even speak from a different point of view. Like now I know many people who are practicing Buddhism, Dharma, and they call themselves secular Buddhists, and they're skeptical, or even they deny any kind of survival beyond death, but they find that the practice of things like, the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the development of the 4 divine abodes or Brahmaviharas, even intensive meditation retreats, that these are beneficial to them in the present life. They benefit themselves, they make them more beneficial to others, and so they practice with that motivation. Even though I'm not myself a secular Buddhist, maybe I subscribe quite fully to the teachings of karma, rebirth, the existence of samsara, the round of birth and death, and to the idea that the ultimate aim of the Buddha's path is liberation from the cycle of birth and death. But I can't deny that people who are skeptical about this can still undertake Buddhist meditative practices, even quite intensively, in order to reap the practical benefits that they'll experience in this life itself. Any comments? This can be quite a controversial area. There's these debates that go on. I try to avoid them on the internet, but occasionally I peek in between the secular Buddhists who, well, maybe this is an example of unwholesome states of mind. They can be very dismissive, even sarcastic towards us believing and religious Buddhists, classifying our beliefs in karma, rebirth, other realms. They call it supernatural Buddhism, or a little bit sarcastically, religious Buddhism, where not, for us, Buddhism is dharma, not a religion. And then on the other side, the religious Buddhists will speak about the secularists as being just, the secular Buddhists as, how do they put it? Well, subscribing to a materialistic scientism, or just trying to make samsara more comfortable for themselves. Johnny is not nodding. Somebody here took the microphone, wanted to say something.
I just said the goal between these 2 types is that one only limited to this life, and the other one is more than this life.
Oh, yeah, that's definitely the difference. That the secular Buddhist who denies any survival beyond death, or skeptical of any survival beyond death, will take the goal of their practice to be applying entirely to the present life. They'll still use words like enlightenment or maybe awakening. I think the secular Buddhists tend to prefer awakening to enlightenment, because enlightenment seems a bit heavy, whereas coming from the hippie era, we used to say, "Wake up, man! Wake up to your life, man." And then instead of liberation, they'll speak about freedom. So the idea is to wake up and be free. And it's considered to be a state which is, that you attain and experience only in this life itself. Whereas the, quote, religious Buddhists, or those who subscribe to the idea of karma, rebirth, samsara, will see that enlightenment or awakening, whatever, brings one to a world-transcending realization and a world-transcending state of liberation. You were going to say something.
I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry.
I subscribe to the idea of karma.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of people who do great things in this world for people and, have a great point of view and a great perception of others, and they're caring and kind. I can think of oncologists or all kinds of people who are nothing but good. And I get the sense that they're being diminished because they may not believe that there's more after. They're just doing it because they want to be better human beings and make the world a better place.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So, but what does that make them less?
I don't say that it makes them less in any way. From a moral point of view, it doesn't make them less. In fact, many of the people who do good, with no motivation except to be of benefit to others and to the world, I would say that is a higher point of view than somebody who believes in karma and does good because they want to get benefits for themselves. But the point I was making is that it's accepting the framework of karma, rebirth, existences beyond the present one, which provides that framework within which the quest for the full development of the Buddha's path to the stage of world-transcending realization and liberation becomes possible. But it's in no way intended to compare people as individuals and say that those who accept this are superior to those who don't accept it.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take one more, then I want to go quickly through and to finish the sutta.
Are we in a place where maybe it's dangerous to hold any view?
I mean, I'm thinking of it's can be unwholesome to have a view that there is no other life. But what if one is atheistic? Rather agnostic on the topic. That doesn't mean you're necessarily wholesome. Can't you be wholesome without having a view on that?
Oh, definitely.
To be agnostic rather than paying your money, taking your choice.
I would say definitely, within the framework of contemporary culture, one could be an agnostic on these issues, on the issue of survival beyond death, and still be committed to a higher, to a high ethical code of conduct. And so that would be, in that respect, one would be engaging in the wholesome. And I'd say also the attitude towards, there's a distinction between the content of a view and the attitude towards a view. So even if one holds what's called right view, but one clings to it dogmatically and uses it to exalt oneself and to denigrate others, then it's the wrong attitude towards the view. And so we find examples in the suttas where the Buddha criticizes that attitude, even with regard to what he calls the pure, bright view of, dependent origination. I think this is in Sutta number 38. Yeah, it's on page 352 in the middle-length Discourses. Here the Buddha says, he's after sort of giving an explanation of dependent origination. He says, purified and bright as this view is, if you adhere to it, cherish it, treasure it, and treat it as a possession, would you then understand that the Dharma has been taught as similar to a raft for the purpose of crossing over, not for the purpose of grasping? And then the Buddha reaffirms this. Okay, I want to sort of go through quickly in just a few minutes. So we've gone through the view section. Now we come to a section, it's not fully clear to me the meaning of this, but this is called the acquisition of individuality. And what this seems to mean is the acquisition of some personal identity. This would be across the gap of rebirths, moving from this existence into some other future existence. So he says, acquisition of individuality is of two kinds, to be cultivated and not to be cultivated. Okay, the kind which is not to be cultivated, which causes unwholesome states to increase, wholesome states to diminish. So Sariputta says, when a person generates an acquisition of individuality, or he acquires some mode of personal existence that is subject to affliction, unwholesome states increase and wholesome states diminish in him. And this would seem to be referring to a bad mode of rebirth under undesirable conditions, in which unwholesome states would tend to arise. Then the opposite of this, and then there comes this phrase, preventing him from reaching the consummation. You could read the note, the commentary gives an explanation of that, which I didn't find completely convincing. It seems a little bit like the commentary is using the fixed categories in which they think. But this expression doesn't occur to my knowledge anywhere else in the suttas. So we don't have some other passage to compare it with and to use to understand it. Okay, and then the opposite of this is the acquisition of individuality, which causes unwholesome states to diminish and wholesome states to increase. And this is an acquisition of individuality that is free from affliction, in which unwholesome states diminish, wholesome states increase, and that enables one to reach consummation. I have a sort of qualification of this, if I understand it correctly. Of course, it seems to me that if one is always born under condition, or is born and grows up under conditions which are very soft, comfortable, convenient, it can obstruct the development of wholesome states more than being born under conditions which are sometimes where one is subject to afflictions, subject to difficulties, subject to challenges. Okay, like if you think of, say, some of these kids nowadays who are born into these wealthy families, and then they get subject to what they call this disease, affluenza. So because of the affluence, they get everything that they want when they're little kids. Ma, buy me an electric train. I'm still thinking in 1950 terms. I don't know what the kids nowadays want. Ma, 12 years old, get me an iPhone. The next day comes the iPhone. Ma, I want an iPad like Johnny. There's the iPad. they go to private schools, prep schools, academies, prestigious academies. 16 years old, he has his own Jaguar or Rolls Royce. Do the kids use Rolls Royce? Jaguar or Ferrari? What would the kids drive nowadays? Only Jaguars. A kid? A kid? Really? Not Ferraris. It's too expensive. Corvette?
Keep them safe.
Okay, so that kid, was it just a few months ago, some kid driving, he ran over a number of other kids, and in court, they brought him to court, and whether they give him a few months of community service, because he comes from a really rich family. Whereas somebody who grows up under difficult circumstances, just about like many of the people who become like great benefactors of humanity have grown up under difficult circumstances, because it's the challenges, the difficulties, which compel them to rise up and above their difficult conditions. But anyway, on the whole, one wants to avoid, certainly, rebirth into the lower realms and take a rebirth in the human realm or in the celestial realms. Okay, this takes care of the first part of the sutta. Then the Buddha, part B of the first part, the Buddha approves Sariputta's statement and says, good and good. Then he repeats the whole thing. Okay, the second elaboration is just in terms of sense objects. Then comes the third exposition in terms of the third exposition is developed especially with the monastic life in mind, in terms of the robes, alms food, resting places, that's the lodgings, towns, cities, districts where one is living, and the persons that one associates with. Of course, that's applicable to everybody. But once you see the basic point of the sutta, you can just read these sections on your own and then fill them in from your own experience, your own understanding. Of course, now it's 11:30, and so I think we have to break for lunch. And so we'll consider that the explanation of this sutta is finished. And so next time we meet, we'll take the next sutta. That will be Majjhima Nikaya, sutta number 115, which might take us 2 sessions to cover. We'll see. And we'll have, after lunch, we'll come back here, say 12, we'll aim at 12:20, and then we'll have some discussion. So if you have further questions, or we could even look at the later sections of the sutta in the discussion period. Okay, just a few announcements I wanted to make. I made this one earlier that, about the next class. First, next Saturday, I won't be here. I have to be in the Boston, Cambridge area. So we won't have a class next Saturday. Then the Saturday after that is the 50th anniversary celebration of the BAUS, the Buddhist Association of the United States, the organization which founded Chuang Monastery. And so those 2 days, there's going to be big celebration, and everybody, of course, is invited to come for the celebration. And if any of you are free that day and would like to volunteer in some way, I think that there's a need for people to assist in different capacities, either with food preparation, guiding the traffic, probably other ways. Who could they speak to? Go to the office? You go to the office on the ground floor of the big Buddha hall and speak to either Kaidi or Yoka, the woman in the front of the office. And that would be appreciated. And I want to ask whether there's anybody, whether you know about on May 20th, there's going to be a big gathering in Albany to demonstrate for increasing the minimum wage in New York State, which is now $8 an hour, to petition for it to be raised to $10 an hour, especially on behalf of retail store workers, fast food workers, car washers, airport workers, and people in other kinds of, basic level forms of occupation. If there's anybody who would like to go up for that, then please let me know. Of course, I want to join in that. And I know there's going to be buses leaving from New York City, but it's a bit troublesome to go back to New York City and then go up to Albany. Okay, so we'll end with the sharing of the merits. So we share the merits of the meditation period, listening to the Dhamma, teaching the Dhamma with the Devas, the Bhutas or fair spirits, the Nagas or weather spirits, and all sentient beings. Akasata cha bhumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata cha bhumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata cha bhumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Etavatacham hehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe devanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya sabbe bhutanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya sabbe satanumodantu sabba sampati siddhya pavagupadaya avichihitato etantare satakayupapanna rupya rupicha sanya sanyino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nivuting. And when I mentioned the weather spirits, that reminded me of something else, another point I should have mentioned, that tomorrow is at Chuang Monastery is the Vesak celebration. That's the celebration of the Buddha's birthday, and then that's combined with the celebration of Mother's Day. So we have here in the morning, we have a special ceremony called the Bathing the Buddha ceremony, where everybody forms a